Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm your host, Manu and He is Stefan Bienkowski. First of all, Stefan, how's it going?
Yeah, very, very well. Springtime is here. The sun is out. It's warm-ish. But I reckon I haven't had as good a day as you so far.
Yeah, you're probably right. I spent the day skiing in Ischgl, and I had a great time. It's wonderful weather, perfect skiing conditions, about -3 to +4 degrees the entire day, and just sunshine. So, yeah, I can't really complain too much. Yeah, it's been a good day, a really good day. But yet, I still managed to make this podcast. So, there you go.
Well, yeah, it's since you're in a good mood, maybe we should start with a game that you actually attended, shall we? Well, actually, we should probably cut to the break first, actually, what we're talking about.
Yeah, we should do first the break, and then we should cut straight to the game that I actually went to. Because, yeah, a quick break today, because we have tons to discuss, and we want to make sure that we get it all on tape. So, yeah, let's get to the break real quick, and then dive right into it.
This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline remains your number one source for all your sports betting this season. Everything from NFL playoffs to pro and college basketball, UFC, MMA, and much more. You'll always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. With live betting options, free contests, and live scores for almost any sport or game imaginable, BetOnline is truly the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite leagues and events. Head to the website today and use your mobile device to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to use the promo code BELIEVE, that is BELIEVE, B-L-E-A-V, BELIEVE, to receive your first reward. BetOnline AG, where the game starts.
So yeah, Stefan, you mentioned it. I did actually go to a game on Saturday, and our job is a lot of work. Before we get into that actual game, our job is a lot of work. But whenever you go and get to go to a game, that is like always the best. I just, this was my first game this year, and I always just think that's always the best. You get to go to a big stadium, there's the shining lights, and you get to, what's always nice too, when I'm back in Munich, I meet a bunch of journalists and friends that work there, right? And you're always able to catch up, and that's always the best. It's just the best. And I want to give a big shout out to James Thorogood, someone we both know quite well, right? I was able to catch up with him. He says, "Hi, Stefan."
Yeah, well, hello back to James if he's listening. Yeah, very, very nice guy indeed.
Yeah, so yeah, he's doing well. If he listens to the show, shout out to him. But yeah, the game, I thought it was actually quite an interesting game, to be quite honest with you. I think a lot of people expected Bayern Munich to really take Bochum apart, and you know what? They did not. It took them a full 41 minutes to actually score a goal. And I felt so bad for poor Manuel Riemann, because him and Janku, another calamity. And this is literally, what was it, like 3 or 4 days after the German Cup, where they were really good against Borussia Dortmund as well. Like really, really good. I thought they went toe-to-toe with them. And it was a mistake at the defensive end that Manuel Riemann was involved in too, that kind of undid them. And I remember just thinking to myself, look, if they go 0-0 into halftime, they might have a chance here. but then you give away a goal like that, and it becomes really, really tough, right? But even, in the end of the day, they lose 3-0, but you just wonder what could have been. If you carry that 0-0 into halftime, and especially this year, and you talk to Bayern Munich players and the Julian Nagelsmann, the head coach, and they all point this out, right? That they are so very worried about not scoring an early goal, because the longer it takes them to score that first goal, the harder it actually gets for them to break their opponents down. They're the first to admit it, that that's a real issue for them. So if you actually give Bayern Munich a goal, it becomes just so much harder to actually come back from it. And I thought that first half until that moment was so very perfect by Bochum. And you know what? You'd be hardened by that, right? Because if you're a Bochum fan, you look at that and you say, okay, well, we played well against Dortmund. We played well against Bayern. We might have a chance of staying in the league here.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that Bayern struggled to break them down, which I guess is technically true because Bochum managed to break themselves down entirely on their own.
Yeah.
That first goal was such a hammer blow, and even I think it's the second goal maybe, the Coleman goal, which I put down to poor goalkeeping, to be perfectly honest with you. I thought Riemann had a really poor game.
It goes right through him.
Yeah, exactly, at the front post.
You're 100% right. Yeah.
And it I mean, I didn't catch this game. I just couldn't watch it because I had plans. But from the highlights, it looked like a match which, Bochum have been much better in recent weeks. As you said, we saw that against Dortmund, but it just seemed like a game in which they kind of fumbled the lines, really, which can obviously happen at the Allianz Arena. Yeah. And I don't think Bochum will have to take too much from that. Whether they stay up or not isn't really going to come down to whether they win points at the Allianz Arena at the end of the day. I think their fans can still be really kind of confident with their performances the last couple of weeks. But I mean, I'm intrigued to know what you take from this game ahead of the PSG match, which, as we're recording this, is about a day away. So I think it's fair to say we can probably got just enough time to preview these Champions League matches. So, obviously PSG are a much bigger opponent, completely different beast. I mean, do you think Bayern fans should be hopeful going into that game? Bearing in mind that it now looks like Kylian Mbappe will play.
I thought, well, the PSG were playing at the same time than Bayern Munich were, right? It was a simultaneous, almost simultaneously. I think the games were like 30 minutes, kicked off 30 minutes apart or something like that. And they lost quite heavily to Monaco. And I looked at that lineup, the PSG lineup, and it was essentially their second team, right? They're running away with League to such an extent that they can rotate, and they don't really have to worry about results, which is something that's a luxury Bayern Munich do not have this year. They cannot rotate even against Bochum, right? They have to play their best players whenever possible, because you lose this game and you lose first place, right? If they had drawn or lost to Bochum, Union Berlin would now be first. And that's something that Nagelsmann actually pointed out post-game, that they feel like they're under quite a lot of pressure in the Bundesliga, which means that they have to come up with sort of a mini rotation which still gives them the best possible lineups. Which is also one of the reasons why Joao Cancelo started on the left as a winger, and he quickly discarded that idea in the second half. He brought on Coman, who was then playing on the right. Alphonso Davies then playing his traditional position on the left, right, and that they looked much better in that. But I think it's really quite interesting that, and I almost wonder, because I wrote something for Forbes post-game about this, sort of like an outlook on what that means. A lot of the players, when they went through the mix zone, especially the French-speaking people said to the press, we'll talk of the Paris, right? And there seems to be a really strong focus about it. But I almost wonder if this Bayern Munich being under pressure in the Bundesliga, and they are, like Dortmund is 3 points behind them, Union is 1 point behind them. Yes, Leipzig lost, but I still wouldn't quite count them out. Frankfurt lost, but I wouldn't quite count them out either. They have had 2 spells now in the league where they were in a lot of trouble while they were playing well and actually played well in the Champions League during that very same spell, right? And I actually almost wonder if that favors them a little bit, Stefan, because you're under so much pressure and you have to perform every single one of your players. Even though if you are able to rotate a few of them, they have to come in and be at their very best right away. And I actually wonder if this sort of situation, which is something that in the past they didn't really have when they finally did meet the big sides, because usually they don't meet a big side in this stage, right? If that actually gives them a little bit of an advantage. And like, yes, Kylian Mbappe is training. Nagelsmann was asked about that. He said, like, we'll face whoever we're gonna face. We have to. We will put out our best 11 and not really worry about who they're gonna put out. But like, let's say Kylian Mbappe is back. Is he really gonna be 100% fit? I don't think so. So, I think Bayern Munich, from what I gathered, the fact that they're actually being challenged in the league is something that they like and that they think is an advantage for them.
No, I think it's an absolutely fair point. We often hear Bayern fans maybe argue that because they can often have the Bundesliga tied up by about February or March, it can sometimes have a poor result on how they perform or how they prepare themselves for the Champions League latter rounds. And I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's quite interesting that maybe if you'd gone back 6 or 8 weeks ago, and you were kind of looking at the injuries that were beginning to pile up for Bayern, after the World Cup, and I think we probably did this ourselves. We talked about how, even though the most important thing in the immediate term is obviously the Champions or the Bundesliga, there was always that kind of looming match against PSG, which, because of the nature of Bayern Munich and because there's so little weight really that another Bundesliga title adds to things, their seasons now are basically defined by how they do in the Champions League. And I think getting PSG at this stage in the competition is such a potential, not even a banana skin, but it's such a huge barrier for them, or a hurdle to jump over, because if they get knocked out at this point in the campaign, it completely changes the kind of the outlook upon which fans have for them in the season. I mean, Bayern could get knocked out by PSG in the Champions League this month, and they could win every single game between now and the end of the season, and it really wouldn't make up for it. I really think that's how much weight we have to apply to these Champions League games. And going back to when we returned from the World Cup, it looked like Bayern were in a kind of sorry state, but they have improved, and they have kind of weathered the storm. As I've kind of said in recent weeks, they came up against 2 very good sides in Leipzig and Frankfurt, and they managed to avoid losing to them. And if you actually kind of look at how Bayern have played in the last 10 games, 7 wins, 3 draws, 0 losses, they've only conceded 8 goals and scored 27. Compare that to PSG, who've got 5 wins, 1 draw, and 4 losses. And the fact that, as you said, Mbappe's not fit, Messi's maybe not fit, the table's completely turned here. And now PSG are going into this match in all sorts of bother. And it'll be really interesting to see how it works out. I mean, because maybe when these two teams come up against other top-tier clubs, these players who've been out of form for the last couple of weeks might suddenly kind of click into gear. Because they know they want it. So it's still a huge challenge for Bayern, but I just think it's really impressive the way that, despite all the kind of drama around the club and the noise and arguably their performances, he is managing to kind of grind out some sort of consistency here, and they now go into this game in a pretty good shape, I think.
Yeah, it's also interesting when you talk to people around the club. There's a general sense, and I think they might be right about this, that the Bundesliga is a lot stronger this year than it was in past years. There's a lot more clubs challenging, right? Like Bayern might still win it in the end. They probably will, but there seems to be a lot of clubs really putting a really good challenge in, right? And that makes it makes it actually better for Bayern. I think they almost think to themselves like, we actually have to watch out here. We can't just go into a Bochum game and think, oh, we're just gonna beat these guys up 7-0, right? Like this is not how this is gonna go. We have to go in here with our best 11 and we have to grind out a result. Because if we don't, we might be second or third, right? And I think that is an aspect that they haven't had for many years. Because the challenge is not coming from one or two, it's not from one club, but it's coming from two or three. And I think that I actually think that they're enjoying it, Stefan.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I'm just really intrigued to go into this game and see how they do, because PSG still have that kind of talent that can kind of win a game on its side, and I think even when Bayern have been playing better, they're still a little ropey in defence, especially when you kind of like some of those defenders come one-on-one with better forwards. So I think it's still 50-50, I think, in terms of the tie, but yeah, no, I think I think Bochum probably did them some big favours on Saturday by basically throwing 2 goals into the back of the net for them. But but I guess we'll just kind of have to wait and see how it goes.
But they know it. They know it. I asked Müller about this post game, and he's like, well, like he had to work for this goal, but he said like we're relying a little bit too much on luck at the moment. So they know it. Which is, of course, then also makes you go into a game like PSG realizing that you really have to put in the work, right? It's really interesting. I think it's all really interesting. This PSG matchup is going to be fascinating. I think the Bundesliga is quite fascinating because you have Bayern at 43, you have Union at 42. We're going to talk about them a bit. And then you have Dortmund at 40. And Dortmund, Stefan, to like maybe transition to that game because they obviously have a really big Champions League game as well this week, right? Where they are actually going to be the favorites, which is kind of surprising considering what they're facing. But Dortmund now 6 games in a row that they have won. I mean, that is a remarkable run for a team that had some really bad press, including from us, for quite some time. I don't want to say we were wrong, because I don't think we were, but I do think that Dortmund have turned it around. They look a lot better, and probably the primary reason for that is that Sebastian Haller is back, right? I mean, he does just help them in so many ways. And you know what? Who else has been fantastic in the recent weeks? Julian Brandt.
Yeah, he managed to score a goal in his hometown, didn't he? Yeah, I thought he was probably Dortmund's best player, actually, in this game. I think this match was really interesting because I think it actually did a good job of summing up what's going well at Dortmund right now and what maybe isn't going well at Dortmund right now. I kind of did a deep dive on Dortmund last week for my newsletter and kind of looked at how they're kind of changing not under Edin Terzic specifically, but more now that they're having to accommodate Sebastian Haller in that front line. And the really interesting thing about this game is that Yusuf Moukoko started up front, but he had to come off after 30 minutes with an injury. And now looks like he's going to be out for the next 6 weeks. And I don't want to kick the poor kid while he's down, but I actually thought he was played terribly before he came off. He was trying to play that lone striker role, and it just wasn't working. The ball, he was trying to play with his back to goal. Every time he got the ball to feet, he struggled to control it. He's getting pushed around by the Bremen defenders, and it looked kind of like Dortmund had reverted back to this very frustrated, very kind of wishy-washy team that just didn't really have a cutting edge to them. And Werder Bremen actually had a number of chances, but then Haller comes on after 30 minutes and they begin to revert back to that kind of team that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 games, and that's when you kind of really begin to see the guys behind Haller come into their own. I didn't even think Haller did anything in particular to play well himself, but as I said in newsletter, just simply having his presence in the team allows the likes of Bellingham and Julian Brandt, and perhaps most importantly these fullbacks, to kind of have someone to play off of. I mean, that second goal that Dortmund scored, which was the Julian Brandt goal, was because of Guerrero just making a really great run, and he finds a through, and Brandt makes the run for him, which I don't even think Brandt can make that run unless someone like Sebastian Haller comes forward, or pulls back rather. And so there's that aspect to it where I think, basically Terzic probably wanted to give Haller a rest out of the Chelsea game, brings on the second striker, and they look like the old Dortmund. The other thing that I think is quite interesting is that it's also maybe the second or third game in a row now, or perhaps the sixth game since this has basically happened in every game since we come back from winter break, that Terzic has had to turn to his bench to bring someone on to change something. And actually, I saw a really interesting stat. I think it was one of the commentator during the Bundesliga game. I can't remember who it was, but it's a great stat that basically said that Dortmund have got more goals from substitutes off the bench than any other team in the Bundesliga this year. And I think that really speaks to the strength and depth in this side, at least in an attacking sense, and that's undoubtedly offered them an extra angle or an extra factor, and it's allowed them to almost kind of blow teams away since the start of the year. And I think that's a good thing, but I think it also goes some way to masking over the fact that more often than not, Terzic sometimes doesn't get his tactics right the first time around. Bayern Gittins, for example, continues to really thrive when he gets a chance to come on. Maybe he plays better as a substitute right now because of his age and his profile. Who am I to say? But it's striking to me that he's not a starter in this team. He's already kind of replaced Daniel Mal in that regard, as he's now the go-to substitute. But I just think that was really interesting as well. So it'll be interesting to see how Dortmund line up against Chelsea in an attacking sense, because Terzic has obviously got so many options, and more often not more often than not, but sometimes he doesn't really pick the right ones. And the only other final thing I wanted to bring up here actually was the build up to the Bayern Gittins goal was actually a really great run from Nico Schlotterbeck, and I just think it was almost like pound for pound a remarkable Mats Hummels tribute. The way that he just kind of danced through opposing players, almost played like a 1-2 with Bayern Gittins to set up the goal, and I think he did a really good job of summing up Schlotterbeck as well, in the sense that I think it was Andy Brasso who said he's a great player learning to become a great defender. And, whether he's a good enough defender for Dortmund or whether he's developing into a good enough defender for Dortmund is a different topic entirely, but he does, and he has shown over these last 5 or 6 weeks how good he is in an attacking sense, or how good he is at developing attacking plays, creating goals, even scoring goals, I think. So it's all very encouraging for Dortmund, but I also think we also have to make a point to say Werder Bremen also played very well in this game. I think I was quite surprised that their XG was only 0.47 compared to Dortmund's 1.97, because I would have said just from watching the game that it would have been almost even, and Bremen missed a number of outstanding chances to level the scoring or even win the game. So it certainly wasn't a game in which Dortmund dominated, and I think Bremen can certainly take something from the performance. But yeah, it'd be really interesting going into that Chelsea game what happens, because it was a fascinating game to watch.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued to see what happens in this Chelsea game, because Chelsea have really struggled under Graham Potter, right? It's now 31 points in 22 games. They're 9th in the Premier League. They're 8 points behind a European spot. Not even like a Champions League spot, just a European spot. 10 points behind the Champions League spot. The 4th spot is currently occupied by Newcastle. The teams that are in front of them include Brentford, Fulham, and Brighton, the very Brighton that Graham Potter has come from, right? And it's going to be really intriguing, because I think Dortmund, if you had looked at this before the season, right, you would have said Chelsea are the favorites going into this tie. But I think, and I don't want to use the word unfortunate, even though it is kind of accurate, I think unfortunately for Dortmund, they're the favorites here. This is their game. This is their tie to lose.
Absolutely. I think Chelsea are all over the place. They're really struggling to score goals as well. I also think it's really interesting if you actually look at how many games the English sides in particular have played since the last round of the Champions League, and you compare it to Dortmund, I could tell you for a fact right off the top of my head that Dortmund have played 9 games since their last Champions League game, which was against Copenhagen, I believe. But if you bear with me for a minute, I can actually pull up Chelsea's fixture list, and I think it's quite striking actually that they've probably played a lot more football, which is also down to the fact that the Bundesliga obviously has an extended winter break. But yeah, since their last champion, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 games I think Chelsea have played.
Wow.
So I mean, yeah, it's only 3 games I suppose, or no, 4 games.
That's quite a bit if you include the World Cup.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, hey, Chelsea have a hilariously big squad at the moment, as we all know. So maybe
in this case, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, maybe. But I think that's quite interesting, and I do think it's interesting, especially maybe for the other Bundesliga teams as well. That I think maybe the German clubs go into this game with fresher legs, perhaps. But yeah, we'll see it. We'll see how Dortmund do. I think I completely agree with you. They probably go into this game technically maybe as favourites because they are in good form.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see how Dortmund do against what is still a very good side with very good technical players.
As you say in North America, Vegas favors Dortmund, right? That's what the odds are saying. I mean, it's the odds makers in the UK as well, right? You just look at the mess that Chelsea has been. It kind of makes sense that they feel that way. I thought it was really intriguing what you said about Terzic and his tactics. And I wonder how much of that is still due to them maybe being still a little bit reluctant to start Sebastian Haller in every single match. Right? Because the guy had cancer.
Yeah.
It's fair enough that they're rotating him in and out, but I wonder how much of that rotation that we're seeing is them. I wonder how much of that gets settled down once they say, okay, we can play him 90 minutes, weekend, midweek, weekend, right? When they get to that point, the other pieces are gonna kind of fall into places for him. We're going to see a little bit less rotation. But because I'm pretty sure that they were reluctant to start Haller on the weekend because they want to start him against Chelsea.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. And I mean, it there's a good chance we might see Anthony Modeste in this Chelsea tie at some point or another because, even though Moukoko didn't have a great game, I thought, against Bremen, him being out for 6 weeks, I think is a huge problem for Terzic because it does now mean that they probably have to rely on Haller a lot more than they would have wanted to. I mean, let's remember that he maybe wasn't even expected to come back until maybe a week or 2 ago, but he's now able to play he was able to play from the get-go actually since the return of the Bundesliga, so he's obviously way ahead of schedule. I mean, there were points in that Bremen game where the camera cut to him and he did look exhausted, I must say, and I think maybe he didn't really fancy the fact that he had to play an extra 60 minutes, but no, it's going to be a really interesting one to see what they do with him and how they play with him, and whether maybe after this Chelsea tie, if they try and shake things up, and maybe even playing like someone like Marco Reus up front as a false 9 for 45 minutes or something like that, or maybe Modeste is finally interested in actually trying to score some goals at Dortmund.
He went there for the Champions League, so that's his chance.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is that, like, I know Modeste isn't really a target man. I know he unfortunately gets painted as such because of his profile and his size, and he's actually more of a kind of penalty box striker. So he's actually probably closer to Moukoko in the way he plays his football. But it would be interesting if, now that this team has begun to morph into a certain style of football because Haller's in that side, and you now have these kind of roaming wing backs who are happy to swing the ball into the box, it would be interesting to see if Modeste can now step back into this team and things are a little easier for him because that space has already been provided for him by Haller, if you know what I mean. Because Moukoko did get plenty of the ball in this game. He just wasn't where he wanted it or how he wants to play with it. But yeah, it's going to be very tricky for Dortmund without Moukoko. But luckily Haller's back, and they do just keep winning games, and we were talking about this over the weekend after RB Leipzig lost as to whether that's the title race over, and I was and you said, well, there's still Dortmund, and I said, look, Dortmund could be within 2 points of Bayern going into the final match of the weekend of the season, and I still wouldn't say they're in the title race just because of how many times we Bundesliga fans have been burnt by this over the years.
And that's fair. That's fair. That's 100% fair.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna argue with that.
yes, but they do deserve a lot of credit for how they've played since the return of the season. They've got more points than any other team in the Bundesliga since the turn of the year, except Union Berlin, and the two of them are way ahead with 15 points each, and then Cologne and Bayern and Leverkusen have 9. So it says a lot about how well they've done, and if they can go and beat Chelsea now at at home, then that would be incredible.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I do think the league is going to remain interesting. You know what? I don't even think Leipzig are fully out of this yet, Stefan. There was a mad statistic that they threw on the screens inside the Allianz Arena as they rolled out a preview for the Topspiel, right? Which was an actual Topspiel between Union Berlin and Leipzig. And since Marco Rose has been in charge, and that's despite them losing to Union Berlin, they have collected the most points in the Bundesliga. 31. And that's 31. They have 36 altogether. That is an incredible run. So, I wouldn't even completely call them out yet of this race. I think there's still at least one more. There's still at least one more episode in there for Bayern Munich where they're gonna drop 2 or 3 games in a row, right? And everyone else can or may benefit from it. But also, like, when we talk about the title race, I know every time I put out a tweet about Union Berlin being for real and them defying the XG, someone just answers and puts the XG table up there, right? I get it. Yes, at some point they will revert to the means. They will drop down the table. But it's been 20 games. And as you rightfully, and this is a really good point that you made when we talked on WhatsApp while we were discussing this game, it's 2 mini seasons this year, right? Because you have a mini season, World Cup break, mini season. So it's not beyond the odds for you to go on a run that defies your XG and keeps you above the means. Heck, okay, this is off topic. There is currently a team in the National Hockey League, ice hockey, right, that's currently outperforming the XG, and they have been doing it for 60 games. We all know the means is going to come and get them, and it's probably going to be in the playoffs. The Bundesliga doesn't have playoffs. If you are able to outperform your XG, it will probably get them at some point next year, right? But it might not get them this year, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think
so.
Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, go for it before I keep ranting.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's such an interesting thing that the way that Union's season has played out, and we obviously talked about how they were kind of. I think we even predicted that they'd have a strong start to the Rückrunde just because of how they did at the start of the season, and that's exactly what they've done. And I mean, they have made changes in January, and I think they've also probably learned a lot of lessons from the way that the first half of the season went, in terms of how they really did begin to kind of peter off. And I think it's also quite impressive that they've managed to have this strong start to 2023, despite the fact that someone like Jordan Sabachu isn't scoring goals like he did in the first half of the season. So it's not as if they're relying on any one player to drag them into these games or into win these games. And when that player doesn't perform, things just the wheels come off. It's not like that at all, really. And I also think Union, or perhaps more than most teams in the Bundesliga, extremely well aware of keeping tabs on how many minutes each player plays, on rotating that squad, and making sure that that the tactics that are implemented are only done so with players who are physically capable of doing that. So I think the question for Union now, between now and the end of the season, is whether they do drop off like they did last season. Or, see, I'm already I'm already referring to it as last season, as they
I
did.
mean, it's fair though. It is too. I actually think you were spot on when you said that. It's two mini seasons.
Yeah. Well, yeah, okay. Well, just for the sake of the listeners, I'll try not to call it that. But yeah, I think that's the question, is whether that kind of drop off will come again, because that's kind of what will decide whether they are in a title race or not. I know Union are certainly not suggesting that they're in a title race by any means, but for the rest of us neutrals and Bundesliga fans, and we want to see something like that happen, then that's kind of what we have to keep an eye on, I suppose. But beating RB Leipzig in the manner in which they did in this game really is a sign of intent, because they came up against, as you said, one of the most informed teams in Germany this season. A team who've beaten Real Madrid, a team who perhaps should have beaten Bayern Munich a few weeks ago, and for Union to go to the Red Bull Arena and to win that game, really, it suggests that they're not just a very good mid-table side who are picking up the points that they should win. It suggests that in one-off games, and we saw that last season as well to an extent against Bayern, in one-off games they can hold their own, so it is really exciting for Union Berlin, and then on the flip side, it's also quite disappointing for RB Leipzig, and this is kind of what I was talking about on one of the shows last week. I can't remember which show it was. Maybe it was a preview show, but talking about how those two results that Bayern picked up against Leipzig and Frankfurt were seen at the time as kind of disappointing results from a Bayern point of view, but what kind of differentiates Bayern from these other teams that say the contenders is that they make sure they don't lose these games, because they probably know Leipzig are going to drop points down the line, and this is exactly what has happened. And it'll be really interesting to see how Leipzig bounce back. I didn't get to watch this game, and because of the Bundesliga's limited YouTube videos, I couldn't even really comment fully on some of the decisions that were made and some of the plays that came about from it. So I'm obviously going to have to rely on how you think these two teams played, but it'll be interesting to see how Leipzig respond to this game, because they do have a really tough list of fixtures coming up soon.
Yeah, I actually thought that both these teams played quite well. What you have to say is that the referee probably got the equalizer wrong. The second goal by Yusuf Paulsen, right? That made it 2-2, and kind of drove me up the wall, because if Leipzig had scored another, I would have gotten that result bang on. But here we are. But the referee, Daniel Schlager, got this wrong. What I thought was interesting about this is that so I did not watch this game completely live, because I was in the Allianz Arena working, but I actually managed to then catch the game on the Aktuelle Sportstudio, which is for people who don't know Germany, but at 11 o'clock at night, they do an extended kind of highlight show for the what they call the Topspiel, right? And that's exclusively on ZDF, which is one of the national broadcasters. It's the equivalent of the BBC, and I guess is ITV a national broadcaster, Stefan?
Yes, but in
really.
in the UK, it's the BBC who show the Premier League, and Sky Sports who show the Bundesliga.
Right, so I guess ARD, ZDF would be as if the BBC had a second BBC, right? Because ARD is like BBC, and ZDF is also like the BBC, but it's we have two different stations that essentially fill a similar role with different editorial groups. Anyhow, long story short, they have an extended package, which is similar to the match of the day in the BBC on the BBC. And so they showed it there, and then I actually went back on DAZN and watched large parts of it too, kind of to watch it back. And it looks like Schlager, the referee, really got that wrong, because they changed this in its Rule 11 in the laws of the game, that what happened was Timo Werner was offside. I mean, this is not headline news. He's a lot offside. But in this case, he was actually not, because there was a long ball coming from midfield. Laduni was the new defensive midfielder we praised on the show just a few weeks ago, right, as a great pickup. And I guess he did his job sort of there. Got Leipzig a point without meaning to. He kind of stretches his leg and plays the ball, right? And then it goes to Werner. And under the old rules, that that would have meant that Werner would have been offside because he would have not deemed to play the ball because he didn't control it. But they changed the rules because it's a long ball and he did not control the ball, but he played it because he made a genuine attempt of playing the ball, right? So the goal should have stood because even though he stretched out and he had very little chance of doing it, the time of the way the ball was played and the time the ball was in the air meant that he knew what he was doing, and therefore it was an attempt of playing the ball, which means it was an action, which means he actually played Werner onside, and the goal should have stood.
Yeah.
So they got that wrong. It was interesting though, because they got this wrong, and all day Sunday you had different referees debating this. Manuel Grefe, long-time standing referee, is a really good Bundesliga referee, FIFA referee, refereed some really big games internationally, Champions League, World Cup, etc. Right? He right away went on Twitter and he's been super critical, and he said they got that wrong. And then Colinas Erben, which is a really good Twitter account, they kind of were like, well, maybe they didn't get this wrong and it's interpretation. But there was a really good article in the German magazine Kicker that broke this down. And the Bundesliga bosses themselves actually have now decided that the refereeing team actually ended up getting this wrong. So there you have it. But I guess that's Stefan, I was kind of worried about, there's one thing that I was worried about when VAR came in, that we wouldn't have refereeing decisions to debate about anymore. That they would deprive us of content that people like us can produce. Isn't it beautiful that we still have it?
Yeah, it was such a fallacy that VAR would fix these problems because, at the end of the day, it still comes down to human error, into human interpretation. And I'm sure if Chris was here, he'd probably say the rules aren't black and white. The rules are there to be interpreted by the referee when they're on the pitch. So it's not as if there's this Bible that has to be followed to the letter. It's the referee uses the rules to interpret.
He would also say it's the laws, Stefan. Laws.
Yeah, sorry, laws. Maybe not rules, but it's
I'm just sparing you a message from him.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think I always kind of come down the line of finding it a little tedious to complain about refereeing decisions, and there was one made in the Frankfurt-Cologne game, which I thought was incorrect, and I thought it should have been a Frankfurt penalty because it looked like a handball. But then when I looked up the rules, or someone brought them to my attention on Twitter, made me realise no, it actually was a correct call. So you can never tell whether these things are right or wrong, and all we can kind of do is accept at the end of the day these referees are human. They work under a lot of pressure, and it's when people start to suggest that there's a bias or that there's... I mean, I know we like to joke that, the VAR team in Cologne are obviously all Cologne fans, but...
Obviously,
yeah. And it's pathetic that Cologne aren't even in the top 6 despite all this help from these referees. But... No, I think at the end of the day, it's not really worth getting too upset about. These things do even themselves out over the course of a season, and I don't think anyone in that Leipzig team would be saying we should have won that game or we should have got a point from that game, if not from this, that, and the next thing. It just wasn't good enough at the end of the day, or they weren't good enough. Yeah, I don't think there's much value in doing that, to be honest, and complaining about referee calls.
Yeah, I had some people in my mentions that Union Berlin are getting help from the referees, and that the Bundesliga is biased towards a team like Union Berlin to keep the league more exciting. I'm like, when has anyone in West Germany ever helped anyone in East Germany? First of all, and second, get out of here. There's so many decisions that every team gets every week. I'm sure the karma police will be out there, and this is gonna come back. Leipzig has had calls that went in their favor. Union Berlin had calls that went in their favor. Bayern Munich get a lot of calls in their favor. This just happens. I actually think, Stefan, there's a project called the Wahre Tabelle, which is owned by the company that we work for, Transfermarkt, where you can go in and you can check where the teams would be standing at if they were if the refereeing decisions were cancelled out.
And
maybe I'll tweet
where does that have Bayern Munich?
I have to check. I haven't been on that site in a while, but let me see. I mean, the wahre Tabelle. It's kind of funny that we have this as a project on Transfermarkt and we don't promote it better.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I just don't think it's really worth complaining about, to be perfectly honest with you. Yeah, I don't know. I think we'll just kind of have to wait and see how Leipzig get on with it and how Union get on with it as well, because two very good sides. Whether they're both still in the technical title race or not, I guess remains to be seen.
So do you want to know if you take all refereeing decisions away and if all the correct refereeing decisions had been made this year? Eintracht Frankfurt would be first. They would have been given 5 extra points. Bayern Munich would be second. They were awarded 4 points from wrong refereeing decisions. Leipzig would be 1 point less. They would be third. Dortmund would be 5 points less. And Union Berlin, Ix, okay, people who complained on my Twitter feed will be vindicated by this. They were given 7 points extra by refereeing decisions.
Which is interesting.
But Eintracht Frankfurt, they're the only team that can complain is Eintracht Frankfurt. They should be first.
Yeah. Well, I guess that decides it. Maybe Union Berlin really are in the title race if that's how it's going.
Yeah. Maybe they're favored by the basement in Cologne. Maybe there's some Union Berlin fan pressing the buttons. Anyways, Stefan, I think we're pretty much at the end of this time. We'll have, of course, a lot of extra content. We'll do some form of transfer show this week. I guess our midweek show is going to be the Champions League recap.
Yeah.
So we should probably put a warning out for our listeners, right? That might be a bit of a different time than usual.
Yeah, I think that'll probably be out Wednesday, right after the Dortmund game, I would imagine, unless there's a late kickoff. I've not checked yet. But yeah, so subscribers can expect that kind of reaction pod to both big games. I know Bayern and Dortmund are playing this week. It'd be Wednesday evening or Wednesday night UK or Central European time, and then we'll do the transfer show on Thursday, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and then the preview show will be out on Friday as per usual. I know we had people ask to bring us out earlier, but it's just impossible because we also need to react to midweek games, and then it's just how it is. We can't do it any different.
We had one listener ask why. had one listener ask if there's any point in bringing it out on a Friday if it's not enough time to preview the Friday game. Which I have 2 points. One, there's no other time to bring it out because we do podcasts for subscribers on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and 2, the Friday game's almost always crap anyway, so no one really needs a preview to that much.
Yeah, and we really always go here's the Friday game, okay, done.
Yeah.
And then we just go into all the other stuff.
Exactly.
So we're not going to do it any different. I'm sorry, but if you do not care about the Friday game, you can just skip through the 30 seconds that we usually preview it in. But yes. All right. Anyhow, that's it from us from the Monday edition. As always, this show is brought to you by Bet Online. Thanks once again for listening, everyone. We'll be back soon with more content. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.
Ende in Sicht.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.